Hey, what's going on, YouTube? It's Josiah, aka Hobbs, and today we are going to chat through the box paper on Hack the Box. Basically, what I want to do with this video is to establish not only the what commands to run, but also the why, or the methodology behind why you would start to head down that track. The reason I am doing this is because I see a lot of videos on hacking, but I don't see a lot of videos on sharing methodology and understanding for the beginner or aspiring CTF or pen tester, whatever your goals are, to understand why we would do something like this, what kind of leads us that direction. And so, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, Paper is an easy-ish box that will basically reveal a web vulnerability through WordPress. And so obviously, with every CTF, if you've done this before, you would know that InMap is typically where every CTF starts. You're not going to start with typical pen testing tools like Whois and digging into DNS and other things like that. You almost always start with InMapping just the machine itself. And so 10.10.11.143, once you've spun that up, that should be the IP of Paper. They might change it later, but at the time of this video, that's what it is. And so I typically just run this command here, this InMap command. So what it's doing is doing default scripts, default ports, actually all ports, my apologies, and double verbose, and saving that output to just a regular file here, all three files. So you've got ginmap, inmap, and xml. So again, if I cat this out, it's going to give me all of the ports that it found and scanned against. And so this one is kind of out there, but basically what you should get if you just were to do default scripts and not all ports is just these three kind of normal ports, which are SSH, and then you've got HTTP and 443. Lots and lots of juicy information here really to start. And so what I like to do is usually pull up Notion, which is my note-taking format here. I kind of fill out this information. And just as a caveat as well, in the description, you should see this template that I use, which is just a Notion template that I like to use for all of my CTFs. It has some really good information that we can kind of dig into in another video, but basically I use this as a source to know where I'm at, where I'm going, and where I've been. And so I'll run all these different InMap commands. I might run auto recon. I might run various privs commands, just depending on what operating system it is. And so really, I'm just kind of taking notes on where I'm going, where I've been, and other things like that. So initially, I just start by filling out this chart here, and to determine what notes need to be sort of driven into. And so if I see Apache 1.4.237, you might put that here. Or if you see a promiscuous port like 8080 or something like that, kind of showing in HTTP proxy or anything like that, you might actually dig into that a little bit more as well. Another thing I like to do is I like to copy commands. So I have a command sheet that I run. And basically what this is doing is showing all of the various commands that I like to sort of dig into if I have HTTP or 443. So, LFI, PHP, burp stuff, curl, WordPress, everything that I could possibly need is in one place so that I can just start driving down the lane, and a lot of the command structures and other things like that are automated. So I've got three ports here. Something to consider initially is that SSH is not typically the first vector you would start with. So despite the fact that ports are numbered from lowest to highest within our command sheet, we might not start with SSH just because SSH, you need certain criteria in order to be able to log into it. So you either need a username and password, or maybe like a private key or something else to be able to log into SSH. And so you might poke at it a little bit, maybe even start a very minimal brute force just to see if, admin is a way to get in, which it could be. And that might be the vector, but you wouldn't probably start there. Probably what you would do is go out to HTTP and then 443. And the reason I say HTTP first is because this is not encrypted, right? So there might be a little bit better data that you're able to access within an unencrypted channel. Sometimes if this is outdated, which we can check into, you might have a downgrade attack or poodle attack or something like that. But typically HTTP is the vector first. And before I do anything with that, actually, probably what you're going to do is run to the site and just start poking at it. So you're going to just type in HTTP 10.10.11.143, which is our IP address. And within that IP address, you'll see that just a standard CentOS, stock page. And so with this, you probably want to start by directory busting. You might even start with auto recon. Auto recon is just a tool that Tiberius created to kind of automate some of the port scanning and enumeration. And so you can kind of dig into that tool a little bit. Link should be, basically if you just Google Tiberius auto recon, you should be able to find it very, very easily. But basically, it's pretty incredible what Nmap has already found as well. And so if we dig into this output a little bit and then maybe even start a directory bust, we'll start to dive on the deep end here. And so there's quite a bit, actually. Let me CD to my other directory. Another thing you like to just do initially is kind of set up your folder structure. So if you have any hash exploits, etc., you can do that. And so in that template, I just have all of those created already. You see some output of a dir search here. So obviously I've been through this box before, but let's just rerun what we're going to do. Again, you'll find these commands in that walkthrough. So go ahead and run out there to grab those. But basically you're just going to run dir search at a recursion depth of 4 with a recursion status of 200 and run it against the IP address. And what this is doing is basically continuously running a common search on all folders. And so it's going to start with all common. So if it's got folder.htt access .sample, then it's going to slash that and run it again. So as you see, anonymous CLI metric. So it ran through .npm and then it ran .npm again and ran anonymous CLI metrics. So that's basically what this command is doing. Already, we found a 200 that seems just a little bit odd. .npm is, it's Node.js kind of project manager, I want to say. So .npm, so it's a JSON package manager. And so basically what it's doing is allowing you to manage all of your, various structures within a, file management system. Don't quote me on that in particular. I just did a little bit of research initially on that, but basically what this is giving us is these anonymous CLI metrics in a JSON package. And so what you could typically do is kind of access this with an API or something else to just kind of determine what the CLI metrics are. Beautiful finding there, though, because if I go out to .npm / anonymous metrics, you're going to see a metrics ID. So successful installs, again, you can kind of access this data through the CLI metric. But the most important thing that I'm going to find if I'm actually on HTTP, for whatever reason, Firefox likes to redirect automatically. What you're going to find is an X backend server office.paper. So what is this telling us? This is telling us that there's a proxy server somewhere, pardon me, and the actual backend server is office.paper, right? So basically, this is the DNS name of the actual server. So we're going to continue to let this run. We might add this to the notes here again. So we've got an X backend. You might add a screenshot just to know where you're kind of at within that space. And then I am just going to edit my Etsy host. Okay. And you'll see I already have this in here, but basically 10.10.11.143, what's being accomplished here is, one second, my apologies. Basically what this is accomplishing is this HTTP. So if I gedit into my Etsy hosts, what I'm going to find is this basically is telling us 10.10.11.143 office.paper. And so it's navigating or kind of forcing that DNS routing to office.paper. Now, why is that important? Or why would you know that? Or where would you get that information? So x.backend server is exactly that. It's the DNS name of that machine, right? And so basically, in the methodology, as you start to track through it, what you want to do is kind of poke at every single thing that you might find and just continue to enumerate in the background, right? So it's not super cut and dry when you're talking about CTFs, when you're talking about trying to get to that next level, when you're talking about knowing each factor, each avenue that you want to pursue, if that makes sense. So enumeration is where you're actually going to do most of the heavy lifting, because if you properly enumerated and you've properly understood kind of where all of the vectors might be, you're going to be much more equipped to be able to start poking through each area, right? So even if you look at my notes, as I was kind of poking around and just trying to say 443, you've got office.paper, right? But you've also got 2.437, right? OpenSSL. You're taking notes in a lot of these different areas, and you're trying to determine, okay, narrowing down the focus and saying, okay, I've spent 20 minutes looking up mod FCGID, which is part of CentOS, and this sort of label here, and I've determined that there's a possible exploit here, but otherwise I really can't find anything. So move on. Let's look at OpenSSL. All right, we've done that for 20 minutes. 1.1.1K is actually a newer version, and so maybe that's not it, right? So you just keep poking at that. You go back to SSH. You've been through all of this, right? And so, or you're not seeing .npm anonymous on HTTPS like we saw, right? So you want to go back to HTTP and see kind of where you can go there. And so that's my methodology. That's my focus, is I like to set a timer, like to go methodically through each and every vector that I possibly find, and eventually you'll get there, right? Because if you've properly enumerated, you'll be able to find that next exploit. So while this continues to run, I've got my gedit in, and what we're going to find now is if I HTTP into office.paper, now I have a blog that's rendered. Okay, so we've got a WordPress blog, which we can identify here, or, obviously the first thing, not obviously, but what you want to do, the first thing is sort of view source and see what you're working with here. So you're going to see, if I were to kind of dig into this a little bit, I might even look for WordPress here. And what you're going to see is a version 5.2.3. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but basically that's what it's showing. It's version 5.2.3. And by seeing that, you can start to dig into that. So again, let's go back, let's take notes, let's make sure that we're understanding each vector here. We're definitely going to read through all of these blogs. So a lot of times users and creators will will use blogs as a way to use information disclosure. You see that a lot. And so, somebody might post a password or an interesting finding or a web vulnerability or just office chat or whatever that might be. Huge shout out to SecNigma as well on this, because this is brilliant. The prison mic name, the blogs that they're making. Nick is the IT guy in the show. Stop sharing secret information. So, sorry, I wanted to let I wanted to add one of my friends to this blog, but Jan didn't let me. Hilarious. So other employees who were added to the blog are now removed. It's just me in this blog. Michael, remove the secret content from your drafts ASAP. Whoa, what's that mean? As they are not as secure as you think. Okay, so somewhere there's a draft, right? And so you can poke around here, you can start looking, but that's probably not where you're going to find it, because a draft requires a user, to have that information. So, if I'm on my email and I create a draft, only I have access to that draft until I send it. So not finding other users here. Something you could possibly do is, knowing this is, a office kind of direction, you could, Google characters of the office and make a user list, maybe SSH in that way. Try and, a bunch of different things. But what we're going to focus on, just because this is a walkthrough, is to look at the service version. And the reason we're going to look at the service version is because typically the service version of a WordPress blog alludes to other aspects or other vulnerabilities, right? So, if you've got a dilapidated version, you might have dilapidated other things or other plugins or other vulnerabilities within there. If you have other plugins like a search feature or a review feature or, anything like that, you might find other vulnerabilities that are dilapidated as well. So let's kill this, because we kind of found what we want to now. But again, this is sort of just digging in every single, in a recursive way, every single, folder there. And then I'm still in web, and we are going to look at WP scan, right? So what is WP scan? WP scan is a WordPress scanner. Of all things. And the beautiful thing about WordPress scan is that it's got an updated database. And so basically what I want to accomplish here, and again, these commands are running on that. You can snag those from that blog. And what this is going to do is enumerate all of the different versions of, applications and, the database and other things like that. And what it's going to try and do is tell us, what's vulnerable and what's not. And it has an updated database constantly. And so after you install WP scan and run it and everything like that, you're going to find a lot of really, really juicy information. So obviously, if you are working through this for your first time, what you're going to do next is look at all of these different findings that WordPress has, and you're going to dig into each finding that it gives you, right? So latest version is 1.5. So make a note of that. Look at construction tech up. You're going to Google that. You're going to dig into that deeper. But again, as this being a walkthrough, we're going to just start with what we know is true, which is that this WordPress version 5.2.3, which we confirmed online, is reported insecure as of 2019. So that kind of aligns with what we saw when this CTF was created. And so kind of, using various bits of information, we're kind of building a picture here so that, all these puzzle pieces fit into one gigantic exploit. So yeah, so we're going to take that. We're going to take this version 5.2.3. We're going to plug it in to our mighty Google machine. So WordPress 5.2.3, you might just type exploit at the end, or you might type in, you might type in, a various, GitHub, you might type in exploit DB or other things like that. But basically what it's going to bring you to is WordPress core 5.2.3 viewing unauthenticated password and private posts. And so remember when we saw, hey, your data is not as secure as you think it is, delete your drafts. That's what we're going to be looking for. And so if we read through this, the first line basically just says, hey, so far we know that adding question mark status equals 1 to a WordPress URL should leak its secret content. Right, so we dig into this a little bit more. We understand, okay, hey, maybe there's kind of a consistent data shared with static 1, static 2, static 3, static 4, and all that good stuff. And so if we just take that and plug it in, what we're going to find is this awesome paper draft from Michael, and it's going to share basically the public blog for the private system. And then it says, Michael, you have to stop putting secrets in graphs. It's a huge security issue. And then Agent Michael Scarn does that. And so a couple interesting bits of information. So the first thing is that the chat.office.paper URL is another part of this system. And so we might add that to our Etsy host because chat.office.paper is another DNS that we can route to. Register with this key. So what this is probably doing is saying, hey, users with this unique key can register to our unique server. So if we dig into that a little bit, we can kill this now. But basically what that's going to give us is all of our aggressive methods here. So Etsy hosts, and then chat.office.paper. You can add it either to the bottom or to the end. I like to add it just to the end just so that I can keep kind of things in line and in check. Move back here. Let's grab this. And what are we going to see? Sure enough, something called Rocket Chat is hosting a application vulnerability, or at least a registration into that application. So let's put pause here real quick. So before we start digging into this, start running into maybe even brute forcing different names or emails, registering, going back to login, looking at Rocket Chat exploits, we're just going to take notes, right? We're going to go back into our system. We're going to say, hey, okay, this is the vector so far. This is where I've gotten, these are the things that I've used. These are the tools. This is how I've gotten into this system so far, just so that we can replicate it again. We're taking really solid notes. We're doing a really good job at our, basically due diligence to dive into that. And even making note of Rocket Chat. We might not see Rocket Chat emblem anywhere else, and so we say, okay, Rocket Chat exploits, that's something else to try, and all that good stuff. And so at every new turn, you're basically re-enumerating, diving in, and obviously what you want to do is register a user. So I'm just going to say admin.com, and then I'll just make the username of password. So obviously you want to do your own registration here. And then we're going to say, okay, this is my username. And what this accomplishes is bringing us to the front end. Or I guess you would say the back end maybe, but basically into the system here. So again, what can we do? What can we look for? What do we have access to? Okay, we have access to this, these users apparently. Oh, a message just came in, so that's positive. Maybe we read through that. We can look at our display settings. We can see if there are, files that we can grab. So you're just, again, enumerating, digging in, taking notes, trying to find out. You're not now moving back to SSH. You might even start the same thing on HTTPS just to see if there's other information you can disclose. So again, doing our due diligence, digging in as far as we can will help you in the end. So this general chat here, again, so brilliant, Sectigma. I can't like applaud enough. But basically, these are all kind of like real things from the office if you've seen it. So Angela's cat lover and all that good stuff, and Kelly likes cupcakes and all that good stuff. And so basically, what this discloses is that Dwight has made a chatbot, and this chatbot will give information to whoever interacts with Recyclops. Basically, if you ask it a question, it can return information. And so that seems really interesting for us because, basically, if we can get Recyclops to share useful information with us, we might be able to, get some information disclosure, get some useful information from that. And so what I'm going to do here is just start a direct message with Recyclops. Ruh-roh. Let's go back. Not sure what happened there. So I've started a direct message with Recyclops. You can say, hi. And he says, learn to speak. Okay. Type in help to get my true capabilities. Okay, what can I do? Small talk. Ask me why the salesman crossed the road. Oh, files here. List here. So Recyclops, get me the file.txt or Recyclops file test.txt. All right. So let's try that first. We're going to dig in. Oh, no such file or directory, but hey, we know that's using the cat command. We know what directory it's in, and so there's no such file. That's fine. What else can we do? So we've got another command here. We can say time. Okay, so it's 10:39. We can also say list. Oh, that's kind of interesting. And so it's giving us basically the CentOS, directory structure, so we can confirm that it's Linux because we probably wouldn't see this on Windows. There's a lot of other things that might allude to that as well. But so let's see if we can just list sales then. Oh, we can. Okay, so what was our cat command? So we can say file sales/portfolio.txt. Got it. So we can actually read files here. So, okay, if we can read files here, we'll wonder what else we can read. So we got to get out of that directory and maybe Etsy password. Now, why do we always start? This may seem really interesting. This is really interesting. Okay, we can actually read that. So why do we always start with Etsy password? Etsy password, if you look at the file permissions on it, are like 99.9% of the time something that anybody can read. So if we, what was that? List //// we can read it. It belongs to root, okay? And root can read and write to it, but we can read it. And that is why we almost always start there. It's basically a file that we know is going to be on the system. We're going to be able to read it, and it's owned by root. And so that can also give us, helpful information or the most updated information or whatever that may be. So we've got file read capabilities. We don't necessarily know if we can write to files. We can try a bunch of different commands here. So we've hit kind of the next milestone in the CTF. But that doesn't mean that we have, all of the super interesting findings that we could possibly, create for ourselves. And so just because we can read files doesn't necessarily mean that we have, a lot of really juicy information. We don't necessarily know who we are, who we're running as. We don't necessarily know a lot of, a lot more information. So basically what you would do is use these two commands to enumerate the system. Okay. So that would be the first thing. What you're going to find though is that there's not really, that portfolio2.txt, all these other kind of vectors that seem really obvious are not giving you any more information. But something that we learned from Backdoor, which is the previous box that we just hacked into, is that we can actually read processes that are running on the system. And that process, so I've kind of talked about this a little bit in the last video, but basically what you can actually do is you can cat proc, and then you can say, okay, what are my processes on my system? And so if I do one, and then if I type in, let's say, command line, there's a lot of different variables that basically you could use. But I'm going to say command line here. And what this is going to output is the process that would be revealed on command line. So I've got init splash running on process 1. And so what we can use is information disclosure, which is exactly what this is. I'm just catting out this process to show what other information or what other processes are running on the system. So I hope that makes sense, but basically what you're doing is outputting the processes to the to the terminal, and we know that we can output processes to the terminal by running the file command, because what it's doing is catting that information, right? So if I run file dot slash just getting out of that directory structure, and then I'm going to run proc, and then I am going to probably run, you can run a lot of different commands here, and what I would suggest probably is going out to Google and saying, okay, what proc commands will reveal this information. So proc self will say this is me, and then cwd, and then I like to do .env just because what this is doing is printing out the environment that the user is in. And this, knowing that this is using SSH is also a good bit of information to remember, because basically what this could be, or what this alludes to, or what this idea is that Recyclops is a process running, and it's using some form of login structure or saved environment variables in order to log in as Recyclops. So it's just an automated process that it's running. And if I do that, what it's going to give me is a Rocket Chat user and a Rocket Chat password, right? So it's running on, local 48.320, and it's using Rocket Chat user and Queen of Blades to log into Rocket Chat as this Recyclops user. Okay. So we got a password, and that's pretty incredible. Again, I hope this process makes sense, or why we would run down this avenue. But basically what we're trying to accomplish is to get some form of information disclosure from this Rocket Chat user, and we've successfully done that by printing out its environment. So now you are running into a bit of a snag here. So we've probably run into a little bit of a snag here, but basically this is using local port 48.320 in order to access it. And so that's sort of hard to access right now without, some port forwarding or some other useful information. We could always try and log out and log in as Recyclops and Queen of Blades, and using this password, and that might give us a useful vector. We could always try, basically what other information we can get from this. And so, or we could, going back to our methodology, remembering our notes and other things like that, we can always try to SSH as Recyclops and all that good stuff. So here's the problem, though, is that none of that is going to work. And the reason that none of that is going to work is because Recyclops is just it's just a bot, right? And so, obviously if this were to work, we could, move into SSH and all of that stuff. But we always want to kind of zoom out and think about, okay, who is creating this? What's creating this? And what are the possible other vectors here? So we kind of have to use our previous knowledge or our logical brains to kind of think through and process, what are other vectors, because none of that is going to work. And trust me, I've tried, right? And so basically, what we're going to think about is who created the Cyclops. Okay, so it's Dwight. And what is a very, very common vector for users? And that is password reuse. And so, as obvious as that probably sounds to a lot of people, using the general knowledge that we have about security, about users, about functionality, and other things like that will allude to deeper exploits and will help us think about, what default passwords, what, other things like that might be on a system, or, password reuse. And so I hope that makes sense. But basically, what I'm just trying to say is, hey, if you're taking notes, if you're enumerating correctly, and if you are thinking logically about the problem and about what a typical user might do, you're probably going to be more successful when trying to exploit some of these vulnerabilities. So if I SSH as Dwight instead of Cyclops and I paste that password in, we're going to be in right away. Okay. So, you might ls, you might, cat out the user.txt, grab your profit here, you see where you can get within the system. And so if I ls-la, I can kind of see, okay, can I get into the root directory right away? Who am I? What ID do I have? Where am I going? You might do a uname-a to just kind of see the version of CentOS that you're running, and determine, kind of where you are. And so if you do your typical enumeration correctly, you're probably going to get a lot of context initially about the machine. Again, I like to just have this methodology sort of in place in my notes system. And when I do that, I can look at privesc and I can start to think, okay, I don't really need this. I'll get linps on here eventually and then run it. Getting familiar with the machine, you've got all of the history, you've got etc password, you've got, looking at the processes, other processes running on the system, etc. And so if you're, doing your due diligence and you're working through the machine, you're going to get a lot of context about that machine. All right, so you've got a lot of context now about that machine. Now start to think through and process through, where else haven't you been, or what else can you do? And so one caveat here that I like to say before we transfer, linps and linenum and all these other scripts to kind of automate some of these tests, is that the reason that we go into the temp directory is it's typically one of those directories that we have a lot of file access to, right? So the reason we don't move into our home directory is because we might own it and we might be running it, and so it's only going to give us certain privileges or certain access into various systems or folders or other things like that, whereas this is owned by root and yet we have write access to it. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to go into temp, and then I'm just looking at the temp folder here just to make sure I actually do have write access, which it looks like I do. I'm going to move into scripts, and basically I have a transfer folder that has a lot of pre-configured scripts. What linenum and linps typically do, or what they seek to do, is they grab all the information off of the machine, they run it against certain scripts and determine if those are valid. And so that was a terrible explanation of what it's actually accomplishing here. Basically, what it is accomplishing, though, is if I go into linps, Carlos Polyp, shout out to my boy. because yeah, this is an amazing tool. But basically what it's, yeah, searching for privilege escalation on Linux systems, and basically running through a bunch of different commands to seek to do that. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to just start a Python server here. So Python 3-m, HTTP 80. We know 80 is open, which is why we choose 80. And then we're just going to wget HTTP, which is 80, into our IP 14.3 / linps.sh. Now, what do we need to do before we run it? If you try and run it, it's not going to work. So we've got a chmod plus X, because what it's got now currently is only read execution. Okay, so it's owned by Dwight. It's read only. So we're going to chmod plus X linps.sh. Now we can run it, and you can either, there's a lot of different commands you can do. I just like to do ./linps.sh. That will run the script itself. Again, you're looking, hey, pen tests only, but basically it's, going to give us a lot of really solid information against, a Linux priv-esque checklist, and going to, give us a lot of really awesome vectors here. So we'll let this run. The nice thing about this script early on, though, it's, as it's caching directories, is, at least in this context, it's going to give our priv-esque vector almost right away. And this is great for multiple reasons. One, it saves us time, but two, it kind of finds something that we probably wouldn't have found had we just done the typical uname check. And so I'm not sure what the secret sauce is with this, but it might be the GCC version, it might be the sudo version, but basically what it gives us is this CVE 2021 3560. And so if I just do a uname and search this, it's not going to come up, at least on the first or second page of Google. But if I just type in this, CVE 2021 3560, 3560, you might even do exploit here. A little bit of free information is that this is made by Secnigma, which is also the creator of the box. So that makes sense that this might work. But basically what this is a priv-esque using polkit, right? So you've got this poc.sh, and what it's seeking to accomplish, you can kind of read through it or how it works, but basically it uses polkit, which is policy toolkit, I believe, and a timing vector to be able to escalate privileges to root. And so easiest way to get this stuff, from my experience, is just to, I'll kill this because I think we know what vector we want or have already. Probably kill this to just create a new tab here and go into cd/home paper and go into exploits. So again, doing our due diligence here, and we're going to say git clone, and we're going to pull this down. Okay, so it already exists. I've already run it. I've already, tried to figure it out. We look in here, we've got poc.sh. We're going to start our server up again. We're going to come back to SSH. We are going to wget. We can even pull that back and say, what was it? poc.sh. Got it. We're going to chmod that plus x poc.sh, and we're going to run it. Okay, so it says username is set to a Secnigma. Inserting username. Insertion of username failed. So ding, 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 this isn't going to work. Or wait, maybe if we just look deeper. So I say that to say, okay, it's easy for us to move on, right? We're not reading our output. We're not doing our due diligence. We're not, taking notes and everything like that. Usually multiple attempts are required to get the timing right. Try running the exploit again. So, if we're not reading every line of output, if we're not driving into all of these various, various implementation techniques and other things like that, then we're probably not going to find the right vector, and we might even miss it, right? So if we run this exploit and we just keep moving forward, we're not going to be able to know that this is the right vector, because we're just going to gloss over it and we're probably not going to come back to it, right? So just advice, the little bit of advice here is just read all your output, right? So the reason I'm scrolling up here even is just because this gave us a lot of other really, really useful information as well. And so what I would do if I were you, pen testing this for the first time or CTFing this for the first time, you're going to actually, dig into all of the output, and you're going to say, okay, what nodes do I have? What vectors do I have? Is it got SUID privileges? Is it got this and that and the other thing? And so again, take notes, do your due diligence, and you'll be all right. Okay, so we're running this again. Hey, all right, this time it worked. Okay, but we don't have a username or password. And so if we go back into this exploit, we're going to see that the default creds are Secnigma and Secnigma for the win. So reason that we want to read all of the output again is just because we might not know what the exploit's actually doing. We might not know what it's running. For all we know, this could be a virus, right? So we want to do our due diligence, make sure that we're making all of the proper adjustments here. And if I just say su-secnigma, and I enter my password here, we see secnigma, and we can say sudo bash. Let's run that again, and we're going to get root. And so how do we know that that's the right thing? Basically, it just says it right here. If the login was successful, simply enter sudo.bash or sudo bash and drop into a root shell. So who am I? I am root, and I can go into root directory, root, and now we're here. Oh, goodness gracious. And we can cut out my root.txt. So I hope this was useful. I hope this was helpful. Again, just diving deeper into the why behind things. If you ever have any questions, please comment below. If you want more information, have any corrections as to why something is the way they are, or a methodology that works for you, we are all ears. We are always open to that. And so let's have a discussion. Let's have a conversation about CTF, and hopefully we can make each other better at this. Without further ado, we'll see you on the next one, and take care.